I wanted to just, I had one more question, and you've just teed that up very well, because we've talked a lot about those policies that will enhance greater efficiencies, greater integration of renewals, and when I asked if there were certain things the federal government can do from a policy perspective, we talk about R&D, we talk about weatherization, there was mention of standards. There really hasn't been much discussion about those policies that relate to tax incentives, those that get the investors involved or help move things around. There's a tax extenders package that is under consideration now. I don't happen to sit on that committee, but some of those in the media are always asking me questions about, well, what do you think about tax extenders and solar and wind? We have the ITC in the residential solar marketplace that is going to disappear completely in 2022. Let's have a quick little discussion here from your perspective. I mentioned in my opening statements that so many of these renewable technologies are really standing on their own now. I mentioned the contracts underway for solar in this country and what that means. Are we beyond that time when wind and solar that have enjoyed the benefits of these tax credits for these many years no longer need them? Remember, we had a deal, we were phasing things out, but now there's a lot of discussion about, well, we didn't really mean that phase out. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, and we've got the government side, we've got the trade association side, and we have those that are kind of making it happen on the ground. What happens if these tax incentives go away, phase out? Do we need more? I really appreciate what you've mentioned, Mr. Conan, about the impact to the nonprofits, the limitations there, the limitations that we have when you cannot avail yourself of these tax credits because of your income. So we've got about 5 minutes here. Let's talk about this role that the federal government plays, good, bad, or otherwise. And this is a jump ball for y'all.
I'll jump in first. I think these tax incentives are invaluable, and I think that in the context.
Well, they have been invaluable. The question for us as policymakers is, how long do you extend them? How long do you give them that advantage, to use Senator Manchin's term, picking the winners and losers?
Exactly. No, I
didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I agree. I was just about to get into that exact point, because you're right. Wind has the market caught up, and I think that when, at least on the energy efficiency side, when those incentives were first designed and created, we've seen, thanks to our good friends down at the other side of the dais here, some tremendous innovation. So the question is, in the context of the threat of climate change, which means that we need to move a lot faster, how do we get the best technologies available out into the market? And I think that that's a tax incentive conversation, and it's an innovation question. We haven't talked much about the administration and their kind of laser beam focus on early stage R&D. In my day, it was R&D, D&D, because demonstration and deployment were just as valuable. And as on the tax incentive side, we know that that'll increase deployment, that'll increase adoption, and therefore that will bring down prices and make sure that these best available technologies are reaching more people. That, to me, is the government role and why they should intervene. We know from the McKinsey report of 2009 that best available technologies often do sit on the shelf. They don't get out, they don't commercialize as easy as we think because of all these various market barriers, particularly in energy efficiency. So tax incentives make a big difference. There's a DOE analysis that shows just on the 25C home products tax incentive, again, it's expired, but if that were extended for 10 years, it would save consumers, these consumers $52 billion. And it would get, again, these best technologies out in the market in the time that we need the best available as fast as possible.
Other comments, Mr. Connor?
I would add that we're we're seeing state by state, utility by utility, the price of solar and wind come down and get more competitive with fossil fuels. However, that is on a state by state, utility by utility basis. Where we saw it first in Hawaii and Massachusetts and California, but that doesn't mean that it has completely reached the Indianas and West Virginias of the world. Phasing out the ITC and the PTC at the current, well, I can't really speak to the PTC, but as far as the ITC goes, phasing it out according to the current schedule would leave us with regional disparities that just as far as where solar will make the most sense within the current utility structure or Public Service Commission structures. So I would be in favor of extending just to give us a little more time to make sure that solar is reaching everyone across the country and not just the coasts.
Other comments? Okay. Mr. Simmons, you're framing something there.
It is a difficult. I do not know if the administration has a position on the issue of the ITC and the PTC. So that is. So I don't want to touch that part. The ITC and the PTC definitely help the deployment of the resources that utilize them. I talked to the head of EDF Renewables last week, who was wondering what is going to happen with the PTC for wind, since they're one of the largest wind developers or wind owners in the United States, and it would lead in his opinion to a reduction of wind deployment. But the question that you ask, I think, is a very important question: is when do we have that? When we have a level playing field? And that one is one that I can't necessarily answer. It's one where, at the Department of Energy, well, in my office, that we're really focused on. We aren't focused on beating up on fossil fuels. We're focused on driving down the cost of renewables and then letting the market take it from there. And so we have the Office of Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, I think, with the help of national labs and others, have had tremendous progress in that area in recent years.
Madam Chair, could I make a contribution on this question?
Absolutely. And before I yield to you, I just want to go back to the point that you made, Mr. Simmons, in your testimony several times. You talked about the area that we're limiting ourselves is in the integration. So if we've got the incentives that are there to build it, okay, that's fine, well and good, but then how do you get that integrated into the broader market? Senator King.
I think it's important in having this discussion to realize that it's not a level playing field, and that we're talking about incentives that have been added relatively recently for wind and solar, but they're also embedded in the tax code incentives for
Other
oil and gas and extraction going back 100 years. So if we want to, I've always said, yeah, let's level the playing field, make it level, let everybody compete. But if you have tax incentives on one side and you take away on the other side, that's not a level playing field. I think you're asking the right question, but I think in analyzing it, we really need data on the economic impact of the things like the oil depletion allowance and other embedded provisions in the tax code that have been there forever and aren't as sort of obvious as things like the PTC that are of fairly recent origin. Thank you.
Fortunately, we're not the Finance Committee, so that we're not the
Through
committee.
some oversight.
But it is part of the discussion, because we can focus on the great technologies that are out there, what we're doing within R&D, but again, part of what we're trying to do is get this out there on the ground, and how does our conversation then knit together with what Finance and the other committees are doing as we really try to gain the advantages that these efficiencies can deliver to us. And I do think that this is an area where we either fail to understand and appreciate or to see the benefits that come from efficiency, We think that it's not enough to really make a difference, and yet this is where the United States really is shining. I was interested in listening to Senator Hirono's question coming from our trip to Vietnam there, and the discussion that was had there about what the United States has done to so dramatically reduce our energy consumption driven by efficiencies, and what more we can do in leading by example with that. And so, again, great opportunities are clearly out there. I do think that we are wholly deficient when it comes to the education piece of this. It's been a long time since I was a den mother in a scout troop, but at that time, that was the only place I ever saw a real focused effort in something with our kids, focused on conservation. You could get your conservation merit badge, and I think we're probably doing a little bit better now, but our kids probably are more aware of what can be done to conserve and to be more efficient than even we are. And so how we educate all of us and then share this education beyond just the United States here, this is something that I think we have some opportunities, but we haven't done a very good job in that area. So we'll be working on that. I'm going to be working on the temperature. I want to thank you all for your comments here today. I think you've given the committee some good food for thought. Mr. Conant, I just really appreciate hearing what you have done, a small group of probably young people who want to make a difference, and kind of opening some eyes about what the possibilities are, not waiting for the government, either the federal or the state, to help you out, but figuring out how to do it on your own and really setting that model. I want to acknowledge the work of the Cold Climate Housing Center, Housing Research Facility, because what you do up there demonstrates the realm of the possible. And for all of my visitors that come to Alaska, it's almost an obligatory stop on the tour when you are in Fairbanks to see what is going on there, but knowing the difference that we're making to families, working in conjunction with our national labs. And I appreciate the role that the labs play, and I would hope that we can be doing more pairing with our national labs with entities just like Cold Climate Housing Research, and taking the genius that's on the ground and utilizing the genius of the men and women in our national labs and working with DOE. I think we've got a great opportunity. So, Dr. Keller, I don't know if you got over to the Cold Climate Housing when you were in Fairbanks, but if you haven't, you should talk to some of your other lab directors that were there. It was a pretty cool thing. Dan, I think you've been there, haven't you?
I have not yet, unfortunately.
Well, we can make arrangements for that. We will.
Madam Chair, I hope that the center will share what they're learning, because we have a very old housing stock in Maine, a very tough northern climate. So to the extent you're learning projects, what works, best practices, we do a lot in weatherization, but there's always things to be learned. And if you have ideas that can be passed along, we'd love to have them.
And I'm just going to talk out loud here about an idea, but since you and I are the co-chairs of the Arctic Caucus, it might be a good brown bag lunch to have a presentation on housing in colder places. Doesn't necessarily need to be Arctic. I mean, right now in Colorado, it's colder than it is back home. But just to focus on that, because it's not only what Cold Climate Housing is doing, but we have other research from other Arctic countries that I think would be very, very helpful in focusing on some of the efficiencies and the innovation, if you'd be up for that. Okay. All right, we got a lunch date. There we go. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.